Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a highly dramatic geopolitical incident that went down in August of 2026. We're going to unpack the specific details of this event to really grasp a fascinating and honestly pretty terrifying new reality in modern military doctrine. What happens when the biggest threat on the horizon isn't actually a deliberate attack, but just an accident? Let's get into it.
Take a look at this quote right here. As a result of Russian electromagnetic warfare, literally everything we're going to talk about today hinges on that exact phrasing. This came directly from the Latvian Armed Forces on August 14, 2026, right after a drone incursion into their territory. But notice what they didn't say. They never called it an attack. Instead, they attributed the border crossing to jamming. Basically, electronic interference pushed the aircraft off its original course. And that leads us to the ultimate question. So, who actually decided? You see, for over 70 years, NATO's entire defense doctrine has relied on knowing exactly who chose to attack. It's built on intent. It relies on a simple yes or no question. But what happens when the border of a nuclear-armed alliance is breached by an unguided accident? Seriously, how do you handle it when a simple navigation error completely crashes into a doctrine that is entirely built on human intent?
Well, to understand that, let's look at Section 1, the unintended drone incursion.
Let's break down the timeline of that morning, because it was incredibly compressed. Right around 4 in the morning, an unmanned aircraft entered Latvian airspace coming from the direction of the Russian border. Immediately, air raid sirens start blaring across 4 eastern municipalities. Within minutes, a quick reaction alert was launched. We're talking Italian Eurofighters based out of Lithuania and Turkish F-16s scrambling from Estonia. Thankfully, they successfully brought the aircraft down in a woodland area near the village of Rugaji with 0 injuries. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the caveat Latvian officials gave in the hours immediately following the shootdown. They stated, "Origin not confirmed." Why? Well, the search area hadn't been fully scoured yet. Hold on to this detail, because confirming the origin is absolutely crucial. It's literally the entire difference between a stray aircraft just wandering off course and an intentional, hostile incursion into sovereign territory. But here's what makes this whole situation even more complex. August 14th was not an isolated incident. Just 2 months prior, on June 8, 2026, a French Rafale jet had to deal with a very similar drone in Latvian airspace. And the official explanation back then? Exactly the same. Authorities stated the drone crossed the border as a result of Russian electronic warfare. So that is twice in roughly 2 months that quick reaction jets were scrambled because a drone was supposedly pushed, not aimed, into NATO airspace.
That brings us to Section 2, from policing to defense.
To put this into perspective, we need to look at how this mission has evolved. For most of its 22-year history, this was strictly a policing mission. It kicked off in March 2004 when the first Belgian F-16 landed in Lithuania. Then, in 2014, a second contingent was set up in Estonia. For over 2 decades, the job was mostly ceremonial peacetime stuff. Launching, identifying, escorting, maybe taking some photographs. But then, in July 2026, at the Ankara summit, allies completely converted this mission into full-blown air defense. This was a massive shift. It handed engagement authority directly over to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, or SACEUR, and the Combined Center in Germany. And get this, the Rugaji incident happened just 5 weeks after that massive change in authority. Which leads to our next part, Section 3, Weapons Without a Target. The crucial piece of the puzzle here is understanding how satellite navigation actually works. When you think about it, a GPS signal is really just a faint whisper coming from 20,000 kilometers up in space. And because it's so faint, it is trivially easy to shout over. That is exactly what electronic warfare interference does. Jamming just drowns out that whisper with loud electronic noise, so the aircraft's receiver finds absolutely nothing. Spoofing is even more insidious. It replaces the real signal with a completely false one, tricking the aircraft into thinking it knows its exact location when it's actually completely lost.
But here is the most important takeaway about this technology. Neither of these methods has a specific target. A jammer is a broadcast, not a bullet. When someone flips that switch, it doesn't just select a single victim. It degrades every single receiver inside its radius. We're talking commercial airliners, passenger ferries, fishing boats, and, yes, any small drone that just happens to be flying past. Meaning, the electronic interference that pushed that drone into Latvia wasn't aimed at Latvia at all. It was aimed at the satellites.
And the climate of interference over the Baltic Sea right now? It has become incredibly severe. Just look at this. We are seeing official complaints filed to the International Telecommunication Union by Estonia, Finland, Latvia, and Lithuania. Representatives from Finland and Estonia at the ICAO have publicly attributed this interference to Russia, though I should note, Russia has not accepted responsibility. Lithuania alone is reporting hundreds of interference events every single week. That's 20 times the level they saw the previous year. Even Coast Guards are dealing with tankers reporting falsified positions. It is a completely saturated electromagnetic environment.
Now, let's look at Section 4, the record this sits inside.
When you look at the wider record on the eastern flank, a very clear pattern starts to emerge. Back in September 2025, Poland had up to 23 drones violate its airspace, which prompted them to invoke Article 4 consultations and led to Operation Eastern Sentry. Fast forward to July 2026, an object, likely a Ka-101, was brought down in Poland. Romania and Bulgaria have seen repeated airspace violations, but notice the consequence column. Whether these radar traces are deliberate or just drifting, they always result in the exact same paperwork. We see consultations, operations, and summoned ambassadors. But never, not once, is there a formal finding of an armed attack.
Let's move on to Section 5, the arithmetic of interception. This is where the reality gets really stark. The brutal math of this situation comes down to pure asymmetry. Look at the cost to send versus the cost to answer. Pushing a drone off course costs effectively $0 if a jammer is already running, or maybe up to $50,000 for the drone itself. But the cost to answer that stray drone, it is well over $1 million. You have to factor in scrambling air-to-air interceptors, the airframe hours, the jet fuel, the maintenance, and the cost of keeping highly trained crews on 24/7 alert across multiple countries. It's exactly like military analysts say, the defender wins every engagement and loses the ledger. There is simply no cheap answer here. Imagine being the commander who has to make the call at 4 in the morning. You can either commit an interceptor and burn over $1 million on a cheap, lost object that wasn't even an attack, or you hold off to save the money and risk allowing an unidentified aircraft to fly deep into your sovereign borders. Talk about an impossible choice.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the threshold of intent.
NATO essentially has 3 doors it can open when responding to a crisis. Article 5 is the big one, collective defense responding to an armed attack. Article 4 is a step down, opening consultations when a nation feels its security is threatened. And beneath those is air policing, the peacetime mission to identify and engage aircraft. But here's the catch you have to understand. Every single one of these doors was designed for a world where an attacker consciously chose to threaten or strike. An armed attack implies there's an attacker. A threat implies someone is actively threatening you. But a drone blown across a border by an invisible wall of electronic noise? It has no author the moment it crosses. Literally, no one decided to send it there. And that distinction is exactly why this new reality is so incredibly dangerous. Think about it. Deliberate escalation can be deterred, right? There's a human calculation behind it, something you can influence or threaten. But an accident, you can't deter an accident because there's no conscious calculation to influence in the first place. So, as we wrap up this explainer, there are 3 crucial things you should be watching in the aftermath of the Rugaji incident. First, keep an eye on the wreckage analysis to see if they can definitively confirm the drone's true origin. Second, watch whether delegating that engagement authority at the Ankara summit actually changes how often jets intercept these objects. Saving minutes in a crisis is great, but does it remove the necessary pause to figure out if an object is hostile or just lost? And third, watch if any concrete action is actually taken regarding those international complaints at the ITU and ICAO about the severe interference over the Baltic Sea. Because ultimately, this is the stark reality we're left with. The entire defense system, all those thresholds and escalation ladders we've meticulously built over the last 70 years, assumes that both parties are climbing the rungs on purpose. The treaty asks, who decided? But what happens when nobody did? What happens when the thing crossing a border was not sent, but pushed? In a system built entirely around human intent, the most destabilizing force of all might just be an accident. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the mechanisms that shape our world.